All right. Before I start, I do want to say if anybody's asking why I didn't get a notification for this, is because this was not originally a public stream. This is something I'm releasing later. But there is an issue with people not receiving my notifications. And, I think this is happening to people on all sorts of channels. So I don't know if it has anything to do with me. It might also be due to my internet. It might also have to do with the fact that, the Google algorithm has been unsubscribing people from all sorts of channels. Please make sure that you're subscribed as well as receiving notifications, because I keep hearing, especially from Pinochet, that he's not receiving my notifications. So for what it's worth, make sure of that. Now, I want people to understand that affirmative action, if you think it was supposed to be a permanent policy that would be for eternity in order to redress the issues that people have had in terms of racial discrimination throughout American history, it would forever, ever, ever be the policy, then I don't see what the use of it is, because essentially it means that it is set in stone that there will always be an injustice against a certain class of people, and therefore this is, a sort of established form of repentance for the country that we can never give up. Like, how every year, for example, we have the Yom Kippur holiday where we basically request forgiveness every year for our sins. So essentially, affirmative action in the minds of many of its supporters is basically just assume that you're racist, and therefore you owe people certain slots in an institution based on their race. No, I think that's ridiculous. I think that that's not the way that the educational system is supposed to operate. It's not a religious repentance ceremony. It's not an act of penance on the country's part to give, first of all, higher slots to people based on their race, and second of all, to force other people to, in a certain sense, it affects their funding too. So certain people end up having to pay more for these college, for their college education because of this. Why? Why, you ask? I'll tell you why. Because if a person is accepted into a school that the baseline requirements for they don't meet, let's say, for example, very good example, and this was a student athlete, it's not necessarily with racial students, but there's the same idea. At the University of North Carolina, very good institution, a lot of great degree programs there. A few years ago, there was that whole program that they started making fake classes, an entire parallel curriculum of fake classes, specifically for student athletes of the football and some basketball players, that they wouldn't have to take regular curriculum courses because they were too dumb. They were basically they were letting elite athletes who were also basically illiterate get into their program, and then they in order to justify this whole student athlete bullshit that they have in the NCAA, they formed a parallel curriculum. That ends up, that you end up having to pay somebody to administer the course. Okay, you end up having to, finance whatever bogus materials are for it. And it's the same idea with affirmative action. A lot of people who end up getting into colleges through affirmative action, if there was no affirmative action, they would not qualify for that school. So there are other schools they could go to that are possibly of less prestige that they could get in there and probably do average, but they don't want to do that. They want to get into that Harvard. They want to get into Dartmouth. They want to get into Brown. They want to get into all those schools because of the branding. But what are you doing here? You're ruining the branding. The branding is that this is an elite institution, okay? If you don't want it to be an elite institution, then you turn it into basically like any other institution, and that's essentially what affirmative action does. It's not as if people did not get into Harvard before affirmative action who happened to be black or Mexican, the numbers were probably not as great. But then again, Harvard was Harvard back then. Also, you have to remember, and I'm being entirely fair, that not everybody went to college back in the 1960s and the 1950s. After the World War II, it became more mainstream to go to college because of the GI Bill. Before World War II, if you went to college, it was a sign that you were probably of a little higher social status than people that didn't go to college. And it still has been for a while. And now that gap is narrowing because there's more Americans with a college degree than ever as a proportion of the population. And yet some people still say, oh, well, America's getting more and more unequal. Well, yeah, I mean, and it's a more complicated issue than that. But if you allow people to get into these institutions that they don't deserve in any way, shape, or form to be in that institution based on the criteria that it established beforehand, then you're literally diluting the value of the degree that they're awarding to you. I've seen this firsthand. I've seen universities that accept people from certain countries because we have arrangements. The United States has arrangements with those countries to let their people come in and get accepted. Saudi Arabia, and they come into the school. They're not ready for a college education, and yet because of the way that we have a relationship with Saudi Arabia, where we owe them money, so they say, well, you don't necessarily have to pay us back in money for this amount, but we want you to take these kids into your school. So the U.S. says fine. Then they come to the schools, but they're not ready for it. So essentially, Saudi Arabia is kind of, well, in a sense, I don't know who's getting screwed more, us or them, because they're expecting their kids to come back with an education, but the fact of the matter is that they're not sending their kids over here ready for an education. And then we kind of, we give them bullshit degrees, so they come back there and they have a piece of paper. So it doesn't benefit anyone. It's the same thing we do to our own kids here in the U.S. And then people want to say it's racist. Well, I'll tell you what's racist. There are people, black people in America, they want to go to these historically black colleges and universities, and they should be allowed to. And the problem is that these things these colleges are financially strapped. I personally think that black people should be allowed to go to any financial institution or financial institution. Yeah, that too. But they should be able to go to any educational institution that they qualify for. I think that Mexicans should be allowed to go to any educational institution that they qualified for. And likewise for all the other racial or ethnic groups that you have. Cubans, Japanese, Russian Americans, Moldovans, anybody. It's all about qualification. And if people want to form these institutions, historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, of which I've read a great deal, and they want to say, hey, our school is specifically dedicated for black people, then I don't care. Go ahead. If they want to form an institution that's specifically for black people, go ahead. I don't care. I really don't. It kind of, I personally don't think it's bad. Other people would say, oh, you're hypocrites. I personally don't care. This is from Michael Fletcher from The Undefeated, the same blog that Jamel Hill writes for. And they're usually full-on Looney Tunes in terms of everything that has to do with race. And they're affiliated with ESPN, and they say the relationship between the nation's first black president and the nation's historically black colleges and universities got off to a rocky start. Just months after taking office in 2009, President Barack Obama did not push to renew a temporary $85 million pot of money earmarked for HBCUs by his Republican predecessor George W. Bush. The move by the new president left many college leaders indignant. So this was before Trump was elected, by the way. Why is it that a recalcitrant Bush would do more for HBCUs than an ostensibly sympathetic Obama would, wrote economist Julianne Malveaux, then president of North Carolina's Bennett College. The Obama administration was quick to point out that it had opted instead to put a larger sum into general grant programs that put more federal money into the coffers of the nation's institutions of higher education, including HBCUs, while easing the financial burden on students. So essentially, he said that, I'm actually going to, I'm going to fund you, but in a more indirect way that you might actually not receive the money. So understandably, they were not very pleased with that. Still, those increases went disproportionately to non-HBCUs. Between 2000 and 2008, HBCUs received on average 3.5% of federal money going to institutions of higher education. By 2013, even as the overall federal higher education budget grew, the HBCU share was down to 2.8%, according to the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which lobbies for black colleges and supports students with scholarships. It was a rising tide lifts all boats approach that has left many advocates for historically black colleges disappointed with Obama. Few institutions have done more to lift African Americans in the nation's 105 HBCUs. They continue to train the lion's share of black professionals and boost the life chances of tens of thousands of first-generation college students. I don't think that statement is actually true anymore. I don't think that the majority of black professionals graduate from HBCUs anymore. But I'd have to look at the figures. He doesn't present them here, so I'll have to look into that one. It just seems a little fishy to me. I could be wrong. But the schools now face what some are calling an unprecedented crisis. While some HBCUs are thriving, many have low graduation rates, high loan default rates, and deep financial trouble. Since 1998, the main accreditation body for HBCUs has put 29 of the schools on warning and 20 on probation. 4 schools have lost their accreditation altogether. That's pretty bad. Meanwhile, more than 24 HBCU athletic teams are on probation, roughly 1/3 of the schools sanctioned that way by the NCAA, because their players are not making adequate academic progress. So the HBCUs were really struggling, and this was in 2016, under Barack Obama. Given that array of challenges, many HBCU advocates are hoping that Obama would do more to lift their fortunes. But his focus has been on improving college access and affordability for all students, not necessarily singling out HBCUs for special help. Not that the administration has been totally deaf to the complaints. Officials restored the $85 million program for HBCUs with great fanfare a year after letting it expire. And overall federal funding for the nation's HBCUs is up more than $1.5 billion a year during Obama's nearly 8 years in office to more than $4 billion. That total includes a $500 million increase in direct grant money, as well as increases in federal student grants and loans. And then there's this quote. It says, I know some people place a caveat on that. They say grants and loans to all colleges went up even more, said John S. Wilson, president of the Morehouse College and former head of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. But even if you accept that, a $500 million increase in grant money to 105 institutions is not trivial. Still, some HBCU advocates say the new money does not compensate for damage done by other federal policy changes that hit HBCUs especially hard. In 2011, education officials decided to tighten federal requirements for the Parent Plus loan program to prevent families from getting in over their heads with student debt. The result was that many students, particularly those at HBCUs, found themselves being rejected for loans and unable to pay for college. The United Negro College Fund, that's what they're called, and I'm not saying that that's their name, so I didn't just blurt out that word, estimates that about 28,000 students at black colleges, nearly 10% of the students at HBCUs, lost their Parent Plus loans during the 2012-13 academic year. Some were rescued by emergency grants and scholarships. Many others were forced to transfer to local community colleges or other less expensive schools. Still others had to drop out altogether. So this was 28,000 people just at the black colleges in 2012 to 2013. That's a major blunder. 28,000 students in 1 year. And I mean there could be other ones that are more egregious that happen all the time. I'm just saying that just for the HBCUs, that's a pretty high number. We just could not believe this was happening under a black president, said Johnny Taylor C. Taylor Jr., President and CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which is, by the way, a pretty large organization. Once the administration learned about the damage being wrought by the loan rejections, officials rushed to put together an appeals process. The vast majority of students who knew how to access it were successful in reversing loan denials, but many students never knew they could have the rejections reconsidered. 2 years later, the new credit standards were relaxed, but by then the damage was done. Advocates estimate that the loan problems cost HBCUs as much as $250 million. The new policies coincide with a general drop in college enrollment as the recession ended and some students chose to work instead. But the decline was more pronounced at HBCUs. Between 2000 and 2010, the number of students attending, so this is important, attending HBCUs increased by more than 12%, but they declined after that and have yet to recover to 2011 levels despite a recent enrollment spike. That trend is similar to a decline in the overall number of black students attending college, HBCU advocates noted. So this is, this is really I think this is pretty in depth, but I think we've gone through enough. Essentially what I've heard, and this isn't the only place I've heard it, is that Obama pretty much ditched the HBCUs because he never had a real commitment to them. What people fail to understand is that in many respects, Obama had a life that was, to a certain degree, much more, I hate to use the word, I'll try to use a different word. He was blessed in many ways that the average African American was not. He had, his mother was a middle class white woman whose parents helped raise Barack Obama, helped fund his education and everything. And he never. It's true. Barack Obama never went to a public school in his life. I've gone through. I mean, if you total it out, 12 more years of public education than Barack Obama did. So think about that. So Barack Obama never attended a single public school in his entire life, and you could look it up. Okay, let's. I mean, don't take my word for it. So Barack Obama. If you want to be fair, because not everybody does it. Hold on. Slowing down on me. No. Okay, so his education was at Occidental, Columbia University, and Harvard University. I think his early education was at see here. So he went to some Indonesian language schools, a Catholic school in Indonesia, because he lived in Indonesia when he was a kid. Then he ended up going to Punahou School, a private college preparatory school. And, then he went to these other private schools in the U.S., Claremont McKenna, and, not Claremont McKenna, Occidental, Columbia, and Harvard. What the fuck is going on here? Damn it. So I would say that Barack Obama had a very loose grasp of what public education has needed. And I'm not trying to say this because Donald Trump knows about public education himself. He obviously also went to, he went to private institutions when he was a kid. So, I don't know why somebody's like texting me about something. I have no clue what they're talking about. But look at it this way, okay? Like I said at the beginning, affirmative action, if you buy into the whole idea, was supposed to redress the inequalities of racial discrimination by giving people preferred slots or a better edge in the point system in order to get into an institution of education. Has it done it? Has it done it? I mean, you answer me. Do you think it's been a success? Because all I keep hearing about is how everything is still unequal and we have to fix fix all these biases and whatever. So, in any case, I can't. I mean, I'm reading these messages. They're like, it's like, what the fuck is this person talking about? Sometimes, sometimes you just have to accept that a program has been going on long enough, and jeez. So look at it this way. Affirmative action has had 30 years to succeed, 40 years to succeed. What do we keep hearing about? How everything's still so unequal. Well, you see, unfortunately, these historically black colleges and universities, which are, I don't think that white people are not allowed to attend them. It's just that they're encouraged to be for black people. If you're going to Morehouse, where Spike Lee went, by the way, and I think Spike Lee got a good education there. He made a number of very good films. I still think he's an asshole, but he made Do the Right Thing was an amazing film. Summer of Sam was also an amazing film. It doesn't mean Spike Lee's a great person, but he's a great filmmaker. Was a great filmmaker. Not so much anymore. But these HBCUs, by the way, I have this book. If you want to know how crucial they were to creating, a talented class of black people, I guess you could call them civic leaders in black communities. This is called Our Kind of People by Lawrence Otis Graham, who is, by the way, a liberal, and he is opposed to the Trump administration, but he was from the black upper class, and he's from one of these organizations. He's from one of these families that they went to a lot of these institutions. I think he himself went to Harvard, but he knows a lot of people from the same circles who, they went to Howard University. Their dad went to Howard University. Maybe their mom went to Howard University. All of their sisters went to Howard University, or whatever the female equivalent is, or they went to Fisk College over in Atlanta. And I have nothing against those colleges. I heard back in the day those colleges were pretty good. Well, not once people are allowed to go to these, once schools became more encouraging of minorities to attend, which there's nothing wrong with that. I think minorities should be able to attend these schools. Well, the more talented people, the more elite students from the black community started to say, well, I think that I should be able to attend Howard University. Harvard University. Howard is not quite good enough for me. So then Howard University's reputation has started to slip. It's still considered the most elite black college in the country, but people always get into their mind that, well, if you were really an amazing mind, you would have gone to Harvard, not to Howard. Then of course there's other, like, there are other colleges that are historically black colleges and universities, like Grambling State University in Louisiana, that I don't think that they're particularly good. I heard that. I mean, for example, they're not very well off financially anyway. So you go there and you might be suffering the entire time because, basically the bleachers are all rusty and, you're sitting at a desk that's about to fall apart or something. So essentially these colleges, because of this exodus of black students to the other colleges, have suffered because of a wider market. They have to compete with a wider pool of schools instead of competing with the other HBCUs as they did under segregation, which was wrong. Okay, I'm not trying to say that segregation was a good thing. I'm just explaining reality. So they've suffered financially. They've suffered because they have a weaker pool of students, because the better students go to the other schools. Also, now you have this perceived need to level the playing field because, for example, a lot of these black students, they come from horrible school districts where they don't learn anything anyway. Their parents don't invest much into their education. So the actual median scores for a lot of these black students has been dragged down because the quality of the public education for a lot of these black students is not very good. So, in order to continue with this affirmative action, they're not addressing the needs at the grade school level. They're trying to address it at the college level. That's not the way to do it. You have to address it at the root. The root is grade school education. And they haven't been doing it. The school systems continue to be complete failures. There was just an article that I saw today. So, let me see here. Okay, yeah, here it is. So you can see this is kind of disgusting because you see like these roaches all over the place. This is in Chicago. Chicago public schools, 1 in 4 fail in new inspections spurred by dirty schools reports. Yeah, that's disgusting. So this is where a lot of these students are going. Now, the schools are dirty, and there's always strikes at the Chicago public schools. So do you think that the kids are going to be getting a quality education? I don't think so. So that's essentially it. And then, some people were asking, well, is Trump going to be better for HBCUs than will be the the Obama administration? Some people have said that he already is. Some people have said that he already is. And now, it's been proven that Asian Americans are actually getting their points deducted on the personality quizzes for some of these college admission tests. Because for some of these colleges, you need to actually do like a college visit and be evaluated or whatever, especially with the Ivy League. So they're getting deductions for personality automatically, as if, if you're Asian, they probably believe, oh, you can't possibly be an intriguing personality. It's like, okay, then why should I even come here? And it's really, I think it's a disgrace. This is from Diverse Magazine, Diverse Education, Issues in Higher Education, saying Asian Americans' right to be angry at Harvard, not at African Americans. So basically what these people who have been asking for, let's read some of it. They say, In an effort to promote reasoned deliberation, here are a few observations intended to be as objective as possible. If anybody wonders about my personal opinion, I have no doubt that Asian Americans have long faced unfair discrimination at elite institutions of higher education, and since writing an op-ed while still an undergraduate in the 1980s, I've advocated against that forcefully. However, the evidence suggests that whites have been given preferences directly and indirectly, and that factor more than anything else is the cause of the problem. Perhaps the most important point is that Asian Americans are, by definition, Americans. Although most universities appear to embellish their reputations by including Asian foreign nationals inappropriately in numbers they are required to report, the issue is whether Asian Americans are facing bias. Asian foreign nationals and Asian Americans are as different as Europeans and white Americans. The individuals are related, including literally. Asian immigrant parents can have native-born children, though some ethnic nationalists have always objected to that despite its constitutional basis. No, almost nobody wants to argue that Chinese Americans are not Chinese Americans or that Filipino. I mean, I've never heard anybody say that in my lifetime, nobody has ever said, well, those Filipinos are not really Americans. Unless, they could be illegal immigrants, in which case they're not, because illegal immigrants are not Americans. Yet among Asian Americans who are third generation or whose roots in this nation date back even further as Californians or New Yorkers, there are those who live in poverty alongside African Americans and Latinos. The assumption that they are well-to-do can result in their omission from even programs that are meant to be universal. So, and you have some of these people who are reacting. It says, well said, Professor Wu. I've been following the Harvard case for some time and am appalled that Harvard has actively reduced its enrollment of well-qualified Asian students on the specious ground that they lack the right kind of personality. Harvard used to do this to Jewish applicants. Best wishes to you, Steve Cohen, Hastings College, I guess, class of 68. So then this person answers, it's important to understand the distinction between cause and effect. Undoubtedly, Harvard admissions are biased against Asian applicants, but the underlying reasons are murkier. If only white applicants were advantaged, then you could easily attribute it to a deep-rooted selection bias for the historically dominant racial group. However, the empirical data also shows a disproportionate preference for black and Hispanic applicants. It's likely that Harvard's bias is not primarily due to an actual negative perception of Asian personalities, even though it acts as if it does. Rather, it's a simple outcome from having a predetermined racial quota in mind beforehand. Since there is no explicit racial score, they obviously have to fudge the personality score. So they're lying. They are lying. It's all a fucking lie. So affirmative action, when it ends, and it should end, and it should end eventually. If you're for affirmative action, I want to ask you, how long do you think it should keep going? Because, don't you think it's had a little time to prove itself? And yet you're still angry. You're still angry all the time. So angry. You gotta learn to chill. Have some, raspberry. There's blackberry ginger ale. So. That's about it. Please let me know. Please let me know what your opinion is of this topic in the description or in the comment section below. Subscribe to my channel. Remember to hit the bell in order to receive notifications. If you haven't hit the bell, you will not know when I'm on. In this case, this was not a live stream. And please like the video as well and share it.